All right, folks, welcome back. Hopefully, you've taken in more than it's just this one presentation this afternoon. We're actually winding down the Social Science Festival for this odd bit of a year. This is a 2020 fully online virtual edition due to COVID-19. Right, so we've had some great presentations so far this week, and I'm sure we're going to get another great one. In a few seconds, I'll introduce to you the presenter for our last talk to wrap up the festival for this year. But before I do introduce you to our last presenter, I will give you a little bit of a rundown as to how this is going to work. For those of you that have attended other talks, I'm sure you're getting tired of me repeating this, but nonetheless, for the benefit of those for whom it might be the first talk they're attending, right? So you don't have access, attendees, to your cameras or mics. You can't turn them on, you can't turn them off, right? So what I'll do is in a few seconds, I'll introduce our speaker and I'll turn things over to him. And once that's done, he'll take it from there and give you his presentation. Once he's finished, then we're going to have a Q&A portion, or a question and answer portion. And I encourage all of you, while you're listening attentively to what Frantz has to say, to think of questions, jot down questions if you have, comments or anything. So I encourage you to ask, and hopefully we'll get a good discussion going at the end of it. The way you're going to be able to ask your questions is through the question and answer window in your Zoom. So you're going to have to ask your questions in written form. So you're going to have to write them out for me. And what I'll do is I'll read them to Frantz, and Frantz then will be able to take some time to answer each question individually, right? So let's get started. It's really a treat for me to introduce to you the next presenter, because I have a personal connection to Frantz. Frantz and I actually met probably around your age, CJEP age kids. We were working part-time jobs together. And so after that, we've lost touch with one another for a few years. And this festival has actually given me, time to, or pause, to be able to connect with Frantz again, because over the years, I've heard about his accomplishments and his successes. So I thought he would be a great fit to participate in the Social Science Festival. Now, a little bit about Frantz. I mean, so that I don't make any glaring omissions. I have a bio in front of me, so I'm going to take a quick peek. Right, Frantz is an engineer. Right, he's internationally recognized as an expert in advanced technologies, especially in high tech and the automotive tech sectors. Right, he's an entrepreneur, but beyond being an entrepreneur, with his accomplishments and successes, he's become an angel investor, a mentor, philanthropist, a coach. And one of the things I know that he's very proud of, apart from his individual successes and accomplishments, is his co-founding of Group 3737, or Group 3737, which is basically an incubator or an accelerator. Basically provides entrepreneurial motivation for people who want to start startups, and encourage them, help them along the way, to encourage innovation. And he's done this in his own native home neighborhood of Montreal, which is considered this disenfranchised neighborhood of Saint Michel, to give back to the community, right? He still works, obviously, as the COO of Letter Tech, and very active still in the corporate and technology sector, but very busy as well with his other activities of philanthropy and mentoring, right? So without further ado, time to turn things over to Frantz. Frantz, it's great to have you. So the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Ara. I'm privileged and really delighted to be among you today, and also thank you for this invitation. I take it to heart. It means a lot to me because I'm a product of education, and I admire professors like you, Bruce, who go above and beyond the call of duty, who really take pride in not just doing knowledge transfer, but really giving the tools to your students so that they themselves can become successful individuals, not just professionals, but really individuals in their own ways. Today, my presentation is going to be focused on, entrepreneurship ecosystems and their impacts on community. And so I'm a firm believer of success comes with responsibility, and it comes with the burden of helping others achieve success. And I fundamentally believe that one becomes successful once you're able to help others to be successful, and that's essentially what a teacher does. So in my own way, I think a leader has to be a great teacher and has to be able to enable others to grow, and by that, you as an individual, by helping others grow, you grow yourself. So a little bit about me. So I was born in Haiti at the age, or before I turned 8. I moved to Montreal with part of my family in search of a better future. Unfortunately, Haiti at that time was going through a political change from a long-standing dictatorship to a budding democracy, and that created quite a lot of challenges, and of course also created extremely unsafe situations for many families, including mine. So we moved to Montreal. As for myself, I call myself statistical and probability because I come from a family of 13. In fact, my dad was pro-life, I can call it. With my mother, he had 6 children, so I'm number 5 of 6. My first adopted neighborhood was Saint-Michel, but I also lived in Montreal North. I lived in RDP and Laval, and I also moved across the world a few times. My first passion and love was soccer. And I really, really thought that my future was going to be a soccer player, professional soccer player. In fact, I was pretty good considered at my age. I played for the Quebec Select teams, youth elite programs from the ages of 15 all the way to, or maybe 13 in my case, up to 20. I even played the Canada Games. I was on the Canadian national program for about 4 years. And I'm a product of others investing in me and seeing the potential. They didn't see the downside of a kid that came from a poor neighborhood or family, but more or less as a kid with lots of potential. And many of them were professors and teachers, as well as coaches and neighborhood families, and so people that invested in my potential. So I ended up doing like you. I went to CEGEP. I actually went to Ahuntsic in Montreal, and I also finished a semester at Bois de Boulogne. And I ended up going to school in the States with computer engineering, electrical engineering as a background, and more. And I also did business degrees from both McGill and HEC. And that really equipped me for what I think was the best to come. And I felt that I was ready to take on any challenge. And I thought that I finally made it, because ultimately, I was armed with great education and a solid foundation for the things to come. And that actually served me quite well. In fact, I ended up working for a company called Analog Devices, which is a publicly traded large semiconductor company in Boston, Massachusetts. And I became a general manager. And in fact, I co-founded a business unit. Then I fell in love and met my wife. And essentially, I moved back to Montreal. I became CTO of Future Electronics, which is one of the largest global distributors of electronic components in the world. And then in 2011, I left to pursue my own private venture. So with a friend, we did a leverage buyout. We acquired a small German semiconductor and sensor company that was in the automotive space. And the deal was to scale the company and sell it in 3 years. It ended up being almost an 8-year adventure, a lot more difficult than I thought. But we finally made it. We actually scaled the company after going through significant challenges and sold it to a publicly traded company in California, in Silicon Valley, and called IDT. We even actually took IDT to the NASDAQ. So I can say that I was one of the ones who were lucky to ring the bell at NASDAQ. And in the process, I also co-founded the Group 3737, which we'll talk about in a minute. I'm currently the chairman. There's a full-time CEO at this point, and really focused on diversity in startups. And then currently, I'm president and chief operating officer at LetterTech, which is focused on autonomous vehicles. Now let's talk about clusters. Some of you have heard this term. What is a cluster? I mean, if you look at Google's or Webster's definition of a cluster, it's really a group of similar things or people positioned or occurring closely together. And so that's let's say the Web or Google's definition or Webster's definition. There are different types of clusters, a number of similar things occurring or gathered together. They could be cells, they could be flowers, it could be events, it could be buildings, it could be stars or galaxies. It could also be computer networks. And it can also be economic and business clusters. So, if you look up the sky, I mean, now it might be a little bit more difficult to do, but, if you look at night, you could see stars and constellations and clusters of stars. And if you look on Google, you type clusters, you'll see, beautiful stars as amazing clusters. But also there are superclusters that are official clusters. Actually, these are galaxies across the universe, and galaxies are probably the most famous clusters that we know. We call them superclusters, and these clusters, they have in common many things, and we'll talk about that in a second. But the clusters are super powerful. Another example of clusters is flowers. Some of us take them for granted because they're plants, but flowers or clusters of plants are super powerful, and they serve an incredible purpose in our universe on Earth. And this is one example. If you think flowers, you can think of bees, you can think of nature, and you can think of the air we breathe. Everything is supported by clusters. It could be clusters of trees as well. It could be clusters of rocks, fishes, and so forth. But it can be clusters of buildings. So if you are in super dense cities like Manhattan, or like Hong Kong, like Singapore, like Shanghai or Beijing, where super dense. Could be Mumbai. You can see the skyline when you look at night, or if you're on a plane at night, you can see these super clusters of buildings. They're becoming bigger and bigger, and it's a phenomenon that's going to keep growing, because as cities become bigger, the skyline becomes more occupied, because you can't reproduce more land, but you can go vertically. And so there are different types of or methods of clustering. So you can do partitioning, you can do hierarchical clustering, you can do fuzzy clustering, you can do density-based clustering, but you can also be model-based clustering. So we're going to focus on the model-based clustering. One of the clusters or model-based clusters I want to talk to you about are economic and business clusters. So again, economic clusters are geographic, They're interconnected companies or institutions that are focused on a particular field. It could be to increase productivity, or they typically search for increasing productivity as well as competitivity. Um, Economic clusters typically can include companies in similar or same industries or technology areas that share infrastructure, suppliers, distribution networks, partners, etc. And they combine or pool resources to take advantage of market opportunities or to fill a void. And this is going to be interesting as we talk, we go further in the presentation. But an interesting example, some of you might say, okay, can you give me an example? Yes, there are some examples. If you talk about Detroit, you typically think of auto industry. If you think about Silicon Valley, you think tech industry. If you think Wall Street, I don't even need to say anything. It's financial. Bay Street, closer to us in Toronto. If you say Napa Valley, for example, it's wine. If you say Hollywood or Bollywood or Nollywood, those who don't know Bollywood and Nollywood, Bollywood is Indian Hollywood, and Nollywood is the Nigerian Hollywood. So clusters of artists and movie producers and actors and people around the film industry. So let's look a little bit closer. If you think about it, this is a cluster of electronics, an ecosystem of electronics. Think this, the chain and the impact, and successful clusters create an incredible economic value. This is an example of a tech cluster that really forms around, let's say the Silicon Valley, and you can see 159 companies, mostly focused on the software side, 2.1 billion addressable markets, 6.3 billion services. The combined valuation of these companies are in the trillions of dollars. I mean, this is massive. And one company alone, like Apple, is worth $1 trillion or more. And so you can see the impact of clusters, and they generate significant economic power, influences the political agenda, influences policies, and so forth. In fact, Silicon Valley is known to have tentacles everywhere. But there are evolutive ecosystems. So, the Ottawa region, or most precisely Canada, which is in basically on the just outside of Ottawa region, it used to be the telecom corridor. And when Nortel imploded, many successful companies actually came out of that, and successful startups, but also larger companies. And so that telecom corridor became, more of a distributed cluster of companies who had, again, similar expertise, similar background, servicing similar industries. And one of the companies that is actually, it's now considered, if not close to, if not still Shopify is a perfect example. That's one of the benefits of the implosion of the telecom industry. There's lots of talent, and then new businesses evolve. And there's now an ecosystem that's being developed around Shopify, which is remarkable, incredible in less than 15 years. And so another example is Israel. And so Israel has an incredible tech startup ecosystem that is not only deep, but also broad. And in fact, 15 years ago, Israel had no automotive business. And one of the most successful automotive tech companies in the world is called Mobileye. It was acquired by Intel. And most of Intel's autonomous and automotive efforts are around Mobileye. But then there's a ton of efforts or ton of companies that are being spun off. It's a very entrepreneurial culture. And it's also helped and funded by the government, who becomes as well a first customer, as well as investing in research and development. There are other types of clusters, like Rwanda, for example. Some of you may have heard of Rwanda. You might be too young, but Rwanda is famous for one of the most barbaric genocides in the history of mankind. Coming from literally the same genes, but the Hutus and Tutsis created this, went to war, and within a matter of months, close to 1 million people died. So Rwanda had to reinvent itself, and it created a cluster of microfinancing. And microfinancing is an interesting way because, to reinvent an economy, giving access to financing to local entrepreneurs, local people, and finding ways to reach out to local villagers or even the poorest. Microfinancing is an exceptional way of doing that. Very successful, and they're known. Rwanda is known as the African example of when people get together for the right reasons, good things come out. There are other types of clusters in Argentina. Argentina, some of you may know, not sure, maybe some of you have origins, Argentinian origins. Beautiful, beautiful country. It's got all the climates and the microclimates. It's got great landscape, fantastic food, but and fantastic wine as well. It's known for beef and wine. And obviously Diego Maradona, since I'm a former soccer player, and more recently Messi, Aguero. So fantastic soccer players. But Argentina has been stuck in a rut over many, many decades of inflation, deflation, stagflation, you name it, everything that's bad around economic growth. But somehow Argentinians are very innovative, very educated, but also very innovative, and they've created a renewable energy cluster, and that actually has created significant high-value jobs, really keeping value in the country. And now, they're one of the leaders in renewable energy, taking advantage of the geography and the climates in Argentina. So let's go back to Saint Michel. Okay, why does Saint Michel matter? Okay, in the context of clusters and ecosystems and so forth. Well, let's remember earlier I talked about potential and I talked about opportunity. Well, I'm a optimist, so I see opportunities where others see challenges. But the statistics for Saint Michel are pretty bad. So 79% of the population is born outside of Canada. 53% are immigrant status. They're not resident yet. They're landed immigrants. 72% of the population is visible minority. 30% of the population live on the poverty line. 40% of the population are affected by the negative effects of poverty. 50% of the children live in low-income families. Low income for Saint Michel means an average household income of less than $30,000. 43% of families are single parents, which further compounds the problem. The families are larger, statistically twice the size of the average Montreal family size. And unemployment rates is actually now, it used to be 14, but it's significantly higher now with the pandemic. It's a culture of moving. So people come to Saint Michel. It's cheap, it's low cost, but they end up moving. And it's a transit community, as I would say it. And 74% of the population rents. So there's no ownership. And when you don't have ownership, you don't participate in the Canadian dream, which is being financially successful. And then in Saint Michel, interestingly enough, you'll find no Starbucks, no Van Hout, no Presse Café. You'll find lots of Kentucky Fried Chickens, McDonald's, and Burger King, and Harvey's, and all the non so great foods that when you don't have a lot of money, you spend a lot, even though they're not cheap. And so, then it begs the question, what can be done? And that was the question that my wife and I, we asked ourselves in 2010. We asked ourselves that question again in 2001, and 2011. And and so we decided to take action in 2012. We founded Groupe 3737 as a nonprofit to try and take advantage of this challenge and turn it into an opportunity. And in fact, it's basically we created an entrepreneurship system founded by entrepreneurs to take advantage of the lack of entrepreneurship diversity and inclusion, and more importantly, the lack of wealth creation equity. And so Group 3737 is an ecosystem essentially. And functioning ecosystems are great clusters. We talked about Silicon Valley, we talked about Wall Street, we talked about Bay Street and Hollywood and Nollywood, Bollywood. So we didn't reinvent the wheel. We looked at creating a cluster that could be favorable to the eclosion of economic growth, new startups, new entrepreneurs, new businesses. And so we started first on entrepreneurship. So from ideation to realization. Then we put together an acceleration program, and we put together incubation program to connect from concept to a business to essentially a realization. So connecting the dots. And we also felt that since there's a lot of single parent households, having programs dedicated to helping women be successful was a foundation which we felt that it was important to highlight it. And then, of course, youth, because it's a very young neighborhood. There's lots of young people, and some of them don't have access to higher education after high school. Most of them don't go through higher education. So we needed to build something that would also be inclusive of not just gender, not just racial or cultural, but also youth as a foundation for the future as well. So Group 3737. So what are the key takeaways? Well, let's take a look at some statistics. So we put in 15 million in private investments, and this was not government or business funded. This is really private investments. It's 50,000 square feet of incubation lab, collaborative and co-creation space. And that really there's 100 active companies that with a combined 90 million of cumulative revenues generated, 600 entrepreneurs mentored, creating more than 340 jobs, really high value jobs. And some of you may ask yourself, why Group 37? What's behind the name? Well, it's the civic address on the top of the building. 3737 Crémazie Est. In the late 70s, early up to the mid 80s, in fact, it was one of the buildings, or that area hired the most what I call daily employees. So daily employees means it's temporary jobs. So people would show up every morning at 6 a.m., line up on both sides of the building, and there would be foremen or job givers that would look at their workload for the day, and they would pick people for the day. And then tomorrow, people that didn't get a chance to get in or to find work, they would come back the next day, and the cycle would go over and over again. So no stability, no ability to create any growth. And then when the textile industry started to move progressively west to Chabanel, and then eventually to Taiwan, Asia, Bangladesh, India, and other China, so the building became somewhat abandoned. And so we saw an opportunity to reinvest and take advantage of that building. In fact, my mother used to be one of these daily employed workers. So what are the programs? The STAR programs that we have, at 3737, it's essentially launching a business. In fact, when you graduate from launching a business, you receive a diploma that is recognized by the Minister of Education. It's a formal degree. We also have a coding program called Code 3737. That's our way of getting the youth access to the digital economy and giving them skills that can actually be turn them to become more employable, but also they can use that to start a business. Elevation 3737. Whoops, there's an extra three. It's an acceleration program. It's a 12-week program for entrepreneurs. We take their projects and we put them through an acceleration program that help improve their business, helps them, really meet with potential investors, potential first buyers, potential customers. We really elevate their business program and turn it into a reality. One of the success of Group 3737 is we don't turn away anyone. We have a 100% success rate. So we don't discriminate based on the size of your project or the value, how technology. We really take your program or your idea and we help you turn it into something real. I told you about female entrepreneurship, so we have a program called Fempreneur. I told to you about young entrepreneurship. We have a youth entrepreneurship program called Entrepreneur de la Relève. We have programs to help entrepreneurs and individuals to also sell their business ideas. So we have an impact selling program. We also have a program specifically tailored to immigrant entrepreneurs. So we call it Migrantpreneur. And we also more recently, in collaboration with the Canadian government, the federal government, is support to help Black communities. So what we do is there's about 4,500 community organizations in Quebec. So it's very fragmented and not necessarily the right support. So we help them with governance issues. We help them put a sustainable program in place so that they can actually generate enough self-generated funds so that they can survive and also serve the communities properly. So generally speaking, we have a growth mindset. And so we think that wealth creation and social development isn't mutually exclusive. We think that there's a sweet spot where you can have a viable business model that's in harmony with economic vibrancy, environmental sustainability, as well as bearable social equity and equitability. So it's one thing to talk about diversity and inclusion, but diversity and inclusion without equity doesn't mean anything. So diversity has to meet opportunity. And so what we're trying to do is to combine this mindset to turn problems into solutions and eventually help the greater community be more sustainable, more stronger, but also be active participants in society. It's a dignity issue. It's not a poverty. It's not a culture issue. It's a dignity. When you're able to sustain for your own self, you own your own home, you're proud, you take care, you get involved. When you don't have to worry about financial independence or paying your bills, you become an active participant in society. You start thinking about cultural issues. You start thinking about arts. You start thinking about higher education. And without that financial sustainability, there's no dignity and there's no social upward mobility. So when people talk about diversity and inclusion, it's a fallacy if it does not include financial inclusion or equity. And so for me, this caption really encapsulated it all. Entrepreneurship is hard. It's actually very hard. It's living a few years of your life like most people won't, because you're tackling issues that most people don't dare to even consider. And for the most part, most of the time, entrepreneurs fail. And so we have to bounce back. So, the idea is to go on uncharted territory so that you can spend the rest of your life to do what most people can't, which is, in many instances, helping others, reaching out, investing in your community, investing in society, but also in doing things on your own terms. So it's not the money, it's how you use it that determines its value. And for me, this is the burden of success. And my burden is, what do I do with what I'm able to generate And how can I use that multiplier effect so that I democratize access to wealth creation, but also knowledge transfer, knowing how to do things, how society functions, how economic systems functions, and how economic clusters function. And when you do that, well, we think we're working every day on building a better tomorrow collectively. And I think there's one key takeaway from this presentation is it is possible to make a difference. You just have to get going. And at Group 3737, that's really what we're trying to do. Beyond all the other things, we're trying to piece by piece put a puzzle together so that we can solve a very complex societal problem. All right. Maybe we can open it up to questions now.
There we go. I'm back. Thank you very much, Frantz. So, folks, it's your turn now. I mean, this was a very interesting, presentation. Lots of information and inspiring stuff, actually. So I'm sure many of you can come up with some questions that you'd like to ask Frantz. So waiting on the board for the moment. We don't have any, but usually this is what happens, right? It takes one person to break the ice, and then once we get started, the questions start coming in after. So here we go. We've got one, right? So first question, Frantz, is where's a good place to start as a young entrepreneur?
The first thing is find out what you love. I mean, that's the first thing. What really inspires you? What's basically challenges you or keeps you going? Because the first thing I tell budding entrepreneurs is it's hard. It's going to be hard, and if you're not passionate about what you're doing, then you're gonna give up. And most entrepreneurs who succeed, they don't give up. They persevere, and they build resilience. And so the first step is starting with you. Find out what inspires you, what gets you going, what interests you. And then from there are many resources that are available to you as an individual. And so, for example, there's obviously Group 37, but there are a number of ecosystems. Actually, in fact, in CEGEPs, there are even associations, whether it's at CEGEPs or universities, actually, that can help. You can go to your local, if you live in Montreal, there's PME Montréal, or you can also go to online. There's a ton of resources that are available online, basic tutoring, understanding. So if you're going to start a business, I suggest you start with what you care about, what you like, but also understanding the fundamentals of business, because it's not when you're now putting money or investing time and effort that you now ask yourself, okay, what is a P&L? What is a balance sheet? How, how do I calculate profit? How do I do my cost analysis? How do I charge? What's the pricing strategy? And so all these basic things, that's why we have this Entrepreneurship 101 at Group 3737, because people are shocked. Sometimes some people have been in business for years. They don't know how to calculate a P&L or profit, or how to knowing if they really make money. I know I've had an entrepreneur for many years said, yeah, every year I make money. And so when I did the math, he was working on for less than minimum wage. So so understanding the fundamentals are key before you jump.
Perfect, thanks. Here's somebody that wants you to give us a concrete example of, the impact of Groupe 3737. Can you give examples of successful businesses in Saint Michel that have started at 3737?
Yeah, so sure. I mean, we have many examples. There's one example, this company called MEMS Vision. So they make sensors, environmental sensors for humidity sensors or pressure sensors. They sell all over the world. In fact, COVID has been good for them, because one of the needs for COVID was ventilators, respirators, and their sensors are used in many ventilators and respirators across the globe. So that's one example. But we also have entrepreneurs who are, have done smaller scale. For example, there's this food entrepreneur. He wanted to, one day he woke up, he realized his son was asking him about non-meat based burger. And so, of course, he looked around what was there, lots of chemical stuff. And so he invented, a vegan product, which is now sold in 250 IGAs and metros across Quebec. And his business is growing significantly. So I have a number of these experiments. There's an AI-based company called AI Rudy, which is using conversational AI to essentially help human resource and companies scale their human resources and also employee connections and benefits. And in the time of COVID, this is a fantastic business when people can't meet and can't physically be together. And so this provides companies with a means of staying connected with their employees, of recruiting, but also of managing employee benefits. So there's a number of different ways and different types of entrepreneurs.
Thanks. So I'll use some French here. La question qui tue, or $64,000 question, which a lot of people have on their minds when they want to jump, I guess, to starting a business or entrepreneurship. Do you need a lot of savings to start a business?
Well, it depends, what your ambitions are and what you want. I always say, to everyone, in fact, I'll give you a COVID example. A lot of companies prior to COVID, and a lot of people actually prior to COVID, or even schools, you ask them, okay, how would you deliver your material, teaching? And yeah, it's in class, because it was no question. So if you take away now, you can't go to class, you can't be physically in the building. What do? Do you stop? So you invent. And so I always say, if money is not available, what do you do? And so if you stop because money is your barrier, then that means you're not really prepared to go into entrepreneurship. And so the first thing really is to identify an area. And then there are many, many resources that are accessible to go out. There are companies, actually, they will even pay you upfront for a product that they care about. You go online. You can do a Shopify site for less than $500. You could do a GoDaddy site for $1. You can get a website, 99 cents. So it doesn't have to be that much. And many of you are young, you have parents, you have friends and family who love you. At your birthdays or when you graduate, they'll give you nice gifts. Rather than giving you gifts, why don't they give you the money? Why don't they invest in your business, in your idea? Why don't they invest in you? So many of you have access to a lot of capital, you just don't use them. And with that capital, you can also leverage that. It could be leverage against a loan from the bank or the BDC or PME Montréal or Fonds d'Action. There's a number of resources that are accessible. You just need to have one good idea and the desire to get it done.
Good stuff. All right. So a personal question about your sort of trajectory. Somebody's asking, why was the end goal for your first company to sell?
Well, I mean, my initial, it wasn't the end goal. The end goal was really to be able to generate a return very fast so that I could go do something else, use that money as leverage to go do something else. But unfortunately, like any plan, you have a linear curve. That's your plan. You go on straight line. But the reality is, it's choppy. It's peaks and valleys. And I've discovered that the hard way. But that was a fantastic lesson to learn. It also showed me about resilience, how resilient I was, and what I needed to do to really turn the business around. So the end goal was not to sell. The end goal was to use that as a quick leverage to make more money to go do something else. And it took me longer, but you know what? After a few knockdowns, I learned how to stay up and make it happen.
Okay, so a question. Somebody's asking about Group 3737 and its activities, and they're wondering whether it's exclusively for the population of Saint Michel, or can anyone join one of the programs offered by Group 3737?
That's a great question. I get that question a lot. In fact, I get that question. Is it only for Haitian people? Is it only for Black people? Is it only for minorities? In fact, we have Saint Michel is the United Nations, but we have entrepreneurs from Ontario. We have entrepreneurs from Africa, from France. We have entrepreneurs who are actually in transit. Um, we have entrepreneurs from Quebec City, from Trois-Rivières, from all over. Of course, there's a bigger population that's in Montreal and Laval and Rive Sud area, but generally speaking, we have programs that can be done online. We have programs that can be hybrid. We have programs that can actually be offer you a physical space, a physical location. You don't have to be in Saint Michel. You don't also have to be from immigrant or immigration. You don't, we have French Québécois, English Québécois, and so we have the United Nations. It's really about inclusion in its own right. So it's inclusion in terms of income, in terms of where you're coming from, in terms of sexual orientation, in terms of gender and age. So we have people that have retired and come back and said, you know what, I want to do this entrepreneurship program because I want to launch my business. A very successful entrepreneur, actually, as well.
Okay. Would you recommend that youth continue their education or take the leap and try entrepreneurship at a young age? Wow. Yeah.
Well,
I don't know if parents should hear this question.
Yeah. They're not mutually exclusive. I know many successful entrepreneurs that have started their ventures in their teens. So you can be an entrepreneur part-time during your summer, weekends, during nights. I know some people that actually they paint during their summer. I used to be a painter when I was in high school in Egypt. I had nothing to do during the summers, so I would go paint people's house. I would cut grass. They pay me really nicely. It was better than working at McDonald's. So you can be an entrepreneur. An entrepreneur doesn't necessarily mean you quit school. So that I don't recommend you quitting school unless you have a purpose for quitting school that is better than staying in school. But even then, myself, I'm an entrepreneur. I just completed an MBA just a year ago. So you should never, ever stop learning. If you stop learning, you're dead. Your brain has the capacity to continue to learn, and there's formal education, which you need when you're young, and there's also informal education or self-education, which you always need throughout your life. So never trade education for entrepreneurship. They're not mutually exclusive. In fact, one augments the other. My education gave me a passport, gave me credibility, gave me incredible insight, incredible network, which allows me to do what I'm doing today.
That was a great answer, actually. So, I'm going to take that bit, and record it, Frantz, and sit my kids down tonight and have them listen to what you just said. So any other questions, folks? For the moment, I don't have any on the board. So if there's anybody that has something, make it quick, put it up on the board. We still have about 10 minutes. If not, I'm going to turn things over to Frantz for a few final words. So I'll give you guys a few more seconds. And we'll wait and see if there's anything else that comes up. If not, then, all right. We've already gone through that one, actually. Yeah, so, yeah, well, I mean, I don't know if this is up your alley of expertise, but somebody on the heels of you talking about Shopify is asking, can you quickly explain how one would start something like a Shopify?
Shopify. I mean, their business model was pretty simple. It was about, helping, you know, um, small entrepreneurs launch a business online. So they were website developers, and they turned that into the best and lowest cost website development tool. And so they created a platform which you can actually quickly customize and be in control of the content manager. And that became hugely popular in the age of digital economy. And then from there, they started adding other tools to that. So, for example, adding payment processing, adding credit, adding developers partners. And so they started tacking along, and they became hugely successful because of the low cost, lightweight, flexible business model. Prior to Shopify, you had, you know, um, website builders that were not good for commerce. They were good if you wanted to do WordPress or you wanted to do a blog, but they were not fantastic tools for e-commerce, online commerce. And so they created this platform that can make it you easily discoverable on Google searches, that can allow you to easily do your search engine optimization, and really that's the mark of their success.
Okay, looks like that's the end of it in terms of questions, right? So, Frantz, if you want to take the opportunity to give a closing remark before I make a closing remark, it's up to you.
First of all, thank you again for organizing this. I'm not one of your students, but you know what? If I had to do it again, I would love to have professors like yourselves, you, Ara, Bruce, and everyone that's involved in the Vanier Festival. Um, Also, congratulate your students, those that have logged on throughout the week, that have participated. Um, you know, um, People often ask me what is the one thing that makes you successful, made me successful, obviously. And I don't think I'm successful. I think I've done more than some others, but there are others that are hugely more successful than I am. But the one thing that I would say that separates me is resilience. And throughout your life, throughout your career, you will have people that will doubt you. You will have people that will be naysayers. You'll have people that see the problems, that don't see the opportunity, that see your deficiencies, don't see your strengths. And so you have to build resiliency. And whether that's in your personal life or professional life. And the fact that I am resilient makes me so much better than anyone else at taking advantage of what's happening around me. And resiliency also allows me to know, uh, what I am capable of, and I don't let people define my future. And so you are students, you have the whole world ahead of you. And, it may sound cliche what I'm saying, but trust me, if I was at your age today and somebody would tell me, hey, look, you can do whatever you want, just think of as the possibilities. Don't let anyone set the ceiling for you. Build yourself resiliency. People are going to scratch you down, try to pull you down, try to find the issues. But if you have that resiliency, then you have that mindset of moving forward, you'll be successful at anything you undertake. And I really mean this. I'm a proven example of that. When you're resilient and you stick to your goals and objectives, and you don't let others define your ceiling, there's no ceiling.
Great. Thank you very much, Frantz. So, folks, that draws to a conclusion this year's Social Science Festival with another great talk, another inspiring talk. And obviously, to me, the linkages are clear between how that builds community and how that feeds into community in terms of lots of the things that Frantz talked to us about. It was a great pleasure. Frantz, thank you very much again for accepting our invitation. And thank you very much for all of you that attended this talk and various others possibly throughout the week. It's been a really enjoyable week. It's been a learning curve, you know, talking about entrepreneurship and continuous learning. Well, it's been a learning curve for many of us here to run this thing in a virtual fashion for the first time, a first of its kind for the Vanier community. And it's been lots of fun, even if most presenters, if not all, told us that they would rather be in an auditorium and have physical interaction. But nonetheless, I think we've accomplished a lot of the missions and provided very interesting presentations, talks throughout the course of this week. All right, so good luck for the rest of the semester, everybody. Right, and hopefully I can bump into some of you in the hallways, hopefully by our next academic year. All right. Have a good evening, everyone, and thank you. And thanks, Frantz.